Good morning from Asian Development Bank's headquarters in Manila, and welcome to the Asian Impact webinar on rethinking skills for women in the evolving labor market. I'm Bimbika Sijapati Basnett, a gender specialist at ADB, and I'm delighted to moderate today's discussion as part of ADB's 2025 International Women's Month celebrations. Last year, our Asian Development Policy Lecture featured Karen Groen, Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institution and former Global Director at the World Bank. She reflected on the relevance of Nobel laureate Claudia Goldin's work on structural economic transformation and women's workforce participation for the Asia-Pacific region. She highlighted that the relationship between women's workforce participation and economic growth in the Asia-Pacific region is not straightforward. While we might expect more women to enter the workforce as economies grow, the reality varies. In lower GDP economies that rely on agriculture and natural resources, such as Pacific Islands, women's workforce participation tends to be higher. In high GDP economies in East Asia, they also have relatively higher participation rates. Many countries fall in the middle. Some have struggled to make significant progress on both economic growth and women's workforce participation, while others have experienced economic growth but little change in workforce participation. This raises critical questions about what's holding women from fully engaging in the workforce as economies expand. Beyond global challenges such as the gender pay gap, unpaid care work, workplace cultures that reward long hours, she reminded us that Asia and the Pacific face additional hurdles, such as high informality, weak labor protections, and the rise of artificial intelligence and automation, which threatens low-skilled, repetitive jobs where many women are concentrated. Groen emphasized that tackling these challenges requires both demand and supply side solutions to reduce women's care and work trade-offs, including stronger labor regulations and investments in care infrastructure and services to promote unpaid care as a shared responsibility with shared benefits. So today's focus really builds on last year's region-wide perspective. It will explore how women's workforce participation shifts across their life cycle with a focus on Indonesia. Despite closing gender gaps in education, many women leave the workforce after marriage and childbirth, facing barriers to re-entry. We will look at how Indonesia compares with other countries in the region and discuss public and private sector initiatives that support women's workforce transition. Let me give a brief introduction of an excellent lineup of speakers and panelists today. So first we have Firman Witolar, who is the Associate Professor of Economics at the Crawford School of Public Policy, Australian National University. He has held roles at SurveyMeter, the World Bank, and has been a key contributor of the Indonesia Family Life Survey. He's affiliated with JPAL, MIT, and Columbia University's CPC Learning Network. He holds a PhD in economics from Michigan State University and was a Rockefeller postdoctoral fellow at the Economic Growth Center, Yale University. Nurina Mardikawati, or Dika for short, is a research fellow at the Global Institute for Women's Leadership, Australian National University, and an applied microeconomist specializing in gender and labor economics. Her research covers gender norms, social assistance, women in politics, decentralization, and digital financial inclusion in Indonesia, and increasingly in Vietnam, the Philippines, and Malaysia. Dika holds a PhD in economics from the ANU, the Australian National University. The panel will be comprised of Samir Khatiwada, who's a senior public management economist at the Asian Development Bank, specializing in human and social development, public sector management, and governance. Before ADB, he spent a decade at the International Labour Organization, focusing on employment and macroeconomic policies. He holds a PhD in economics from the Graduate Institute of International and Development Studies in Geneva and a master's in public policy from Harvard University. Next, we have Maria Monica Wihardja, or Monica for short, who is a visiting fellow at ICS Yusof Ishak Institute and an adjunct assistant professor at the National University of Singapore. Her research areas include digital economy, labor markets, regional supply chains, and elections. She serves on multiple editorial boards and policy institutions. She holds a PhD in regional science from Cornell University MPhil in economics from Cambridge University, and a BA in applied mathematics and economics from Brown University. Next, we have Harumi Toyama, gender specialist at the Asian Development Bank, focusing on private sector projects to advance gender equality and women's careers. Her professional experience spans 25 years across civil society, public, private, and development sectors, including the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, Ernst & Young, and the UNESCO. She holds a master's degree in education, gender, and international development from the University College London. So Firman and Dika, over to you to present your key findings from your research on women's workforce participation in Indonesia. Thank you.
Thank you, Bimbika, for introducing us, and for thank you, ADB, for inviting us to participate in this panel. My name is Firman Witular from ANU. And this presentation today is based on a joint study with my co-author, Dorina Brikawati who is here, and Indriani Pratiwi and Nabila Huwaida. And this is our study is an attempt to understand the challenges faced by women and the support they need to be able to return to work into preferably quality jobs using the insight from Indonesia. Okay. I want to start by providing a context that may already be familiar to many of you. We know that globally the gender gap in education has narrowed, but despite the higher educational attainment among women, the disappearing gender gap in education, the gender gap in economic participation persists. And indeed, in Indonesia, as in many other countries, the issue in the female labor force participation has been well recognized. In the FLFPR has stagnated in Indonesia at around 60% in the past 2 decades, while the male labor force participation consistently exceeded 90% in the last 2 decades. In the next 10 minutes, I'm going to provide a deeper analysis looking at labor force participation by looking at different cohorts, age group, location, and education attainment. And this exercise reveals more insights, including about women re-entering the workforce after exit, where many of them actually returns to non-wage employment. So I'm going to start with a descriptive analysis to understand Indonesian women's economic participation across their phases of life. And I'm going to start with by using we're using the National Labor Force Survey, SACRNAS. This is a nationally representative cross-sectional data. And this work built on previous work by Dika, by Dorina, and Dong that used the SUSENAS, this socioeconomic survey in Indonesia. We're using this alternative data source that enable us to cover more cohorts, provide a deeper analysis that can entangle between urban and women with varying level of education. And then I'm going to continue with a descriptive analysis that follows the same women and their trajectory, their labor market trajectory, using the longitudinal data from the Indonesia Families Life Survey. And then Dika will continue with policy options that that enables women to make it easier for women to return to work or to have stronger labor market attachment. Okay. So when we start looking at the data, the first thing that we observe is that the diverging labor market trajectories between men and women. So on the vertical axis here is the labor force participation, and we're looking at those between population of 20 and 69 years old, and the labor participation is defined as those who have job and those who are unemployed but still searching for a job as a proportion of that group. And each line define a cohort. The bold line here is representing those who were born in the 1990s. Those are the younger cohort, while the blue dashed line represent those older cohort. Now, what we see here is there is a different labor market trajectory between gender, right? And where women's trajectory tends to be more fluctuative, right? For example, for some cohorts, where we see that while it's high at the beginning and it's a dip around the age of 20, and then among the women, it's peak when they are about 40 years old. On the other hand, there's no difference in male labor force participation patterns if you compare across different cohorts. Okay, so the next thing we do is then we want to try to disentangle the difference, trying to look at women and rural and urban, and we see that the urban women experience greater fluctuations in their labor force participation. We see that urban women, their participation is higher when they're in the 20s, especially for the younger cohorts, right? It's up to almost 60%. But it seems more challenging for the younger cohort. If you look again still at the urban cohorts, it seems to be more challenging for the younger cohort in urban women to remain in the labor force. As soon as they exit, they enter the childbearing and marriage age. There is pronounced decline in labor force participation. Whereas for the rural women, we can see that it decreased by age and it reached its peak around 40, 50. And at its peak, the participation is actually higher than of urban. Now, moving on to looking at different educational attainment, we see that urban women with higher educational attainment actually have stronger labor market attachment. They have labor participation peak in their 20s, but it remains relatively high, right? It drops a little bit, but then remains pretty high. Whereas for women with lower educational attainment, it increases as they age, right? And again, drop during childbearing and marriage, and increase, but yeah, to reach another peak in around their 40. So there is a tentative evidence of double peak in women labor force participation, as first when they enter and then later on when they re-enter. Okay. Now we try to look at different type of employment, and first we look at wage employment, which we see as promising higher quality job, more stable earnings. And when we look at the urban women in wage employment, looking at the different education level, the good news is among the younger cohorts entering workforce, there are more women in wage employment. But the bad news is it's more difficult for them to remain in wage employment during childbearing years, as we see in that inverted U-shaped curve. Again, we see different patterns across different educational attainment, remarkably different, right? And then we next look at the urban women, but again, we're focusing on self-employment. So it turns out that when we see the dip in the labor market participation of women and going back up again, a lot of it, if you look at the lower educated women, less educated women, most of them re-enter the market into self-employment, right? And this is dominated, and self-employment here is dominated by own account employment, which tends to be low quality, low income generating instead of other type of self-employment. Now, when women return following exit, they end up working as a self-employed. Now, this graph is where we start looking at the trajectories of the same woman using the data from IFLS. And we want to see how the birth of the first child is associated with labor market participation of women. And this figure shows the probability of working relative to 1 year before the birth of the first child. The sample is women born between 60 and 90 who gave birth to their first child in the period that we observe. Around 6,000 women or close to 39,000 women year observations. Now the vertical axis actually shows the probability of working, and the horizontal axis shows the number of years before and after the birth of the first child. And the probability of working is normalized to 0 in the year before childbirth, following standard practice. So what the figures tells us is that it confirms that the probability of working immediately drops in the year of the first childbirth before slowly picking up again. Okay, and the probability of employment drops, in fact, significantly in the year of the first birth, and gradually increasing. This is the mummy effect in the literature. So we don't see any statistical significant difference in employment probability from pre-childbirth to 3 years post-childbirth. So it is only after 5 years after childbirth that the probability of employment surpasses the pre-childbirth level. So here we see the trajectory that was explained in the cross-sectional data earlier. And we can see that when we're looking at different education level, we see this among the lower women with lower education, right? They exit and they re-enter a little bit quicker compared to higher education attainment, and this is we think this is probably explained by the fact that women with lower education attainment cannot afford not to work for a long time compared to their counterpart with higher education. Now, so what we have seen so far is that there are gender labor market trajectories where women are more likely than men to exit from the labor markets due to either constraints or personal choices. Now, women with lower education often return to work out of necessity, as we've seen in the previous graph, but tend to enter into lower quality jobs. Whereas then the women with higher education will exit the labor force during childbearing years. Some of them re-enter as self-employed, but many do not return at all. Now, I guess the question is how to support more of these women returning to work, preferably into quality formal jobs, and how to facilitate their re-entry, by using different policy that might be available. And with that, I will hand this over to Dika.
Thank you so much, Firman, and thank you for the opportunities to ADB team. I'd like to start by acknowledgement of country. Firman and I are joining you all from Canberra, the land of Nganwal and Mangpri people. We acknowledge and celebrate the first Australians on whose traditional lands we meet and pay our respect to the elders past and present. So for my part, I'll discuss more targeted policy options that can support women's transition back to the workforce. So from what Firman has presented, we learned that women often face career interruptions due to caregiving responsibilities, as we can see like from the graphs where the female labor force participation declined during their childbearing years. And however, re-entering the workforce is often not straightforward, and reskilling can be a pathway to support for women's re-entry. And when they try to re-enter the workforce, they will face a couple of challenges. And one of them is consider around skills, for instance, skills depreciation. So when skills are not actively used, they can weaken over time, for instance, and there may be higher depreciation rates if they are in more technology-driven occupations that requires constant skills update. And beyond skills depreciation, they may face skills obsolescence, where skills required by industries change over time, for instance, automation that replaces manual and repetitive tasks. Another challenge is firm-specific skills may no longer be relevant. In the case of Indonesia, with limited access to long-term paid and unpaid maternity leave, more likely when women re-enter, they re-enter to a different firm or even different kinds of employment. Without support around reskilling and upskilling, they may struggle to return to the workforce and often settling to lower quality jobs, as what we have seen from the charts presented by Freeman. In Indonesia, the government provides a range of training programs accessible both online and offline. And these include public vocational training center like BLK, Siap Kerja platform managed by Indonesia's Ministry of Manpower. And there is also Kartu Prakerja implemented by PMO. So on this slide, you can see an overview of the key features of the reskilling programs available in Indonesia. However, it's important to note these programs not designed specifically for women or even for returning women. They are open to both men and women. And in addition to these national programs, we found that there are smaller local government-led initiatives, for instance, that really focus on enhancing women's economic participation. And many of these, they tend to focus on self-employment path so that women have equipped with these skills to start micro and small enterprises, for instance. So knowing that the government offers various training programs, we just want to explore what is the take-up rates of these government-funded training programs, not only at the aggregate level, but also the heterogeneity among women. So we do this by using Indonesia's labor force survey, and we just focusing on one variable, which is to what extent they actually took any government-funded training in the past 3 years. So we cover all kinds of government training, Kartu Prakerja, and other kinds of government training, excluding Prakerja. So from this chart, the left chart, we can see that women's participation in government-funded training is nearly equal to men's in total, and also for Kartu Prakerja. On the right chart, we observe 3 key patterns. So urban women have higher take-up rate than rural women, maybe due to better access to training venues, better internet connection, because some of these trainings are actually offered online. And then on the educational attainment, women with higher education, so above senior high school, they are more likely to enroll in government-funded training program. However, we also know from earlier findings shared by Firman that women with lower educational levels are more likely to return to the workforce, and reskilling can actually help them to secure quality employment. Another observation is that younger women, they are born in 1990 to 1999, they enroll at these government-funded programs at higher rates than older cohorts. Yet again, as Firman showed, that women aged 40 and above, those born between 1970 to 1989, they actually represent a key group re-entering the workforce. However, their training take-up remains relatively low. And again, the shift towards more digital-based training, of course, that particularly benefits women with stronger digital skills. However, this can also widen the gap for older cohorts who can find onboarding to digital platform more challenging. And this signals the need to have more accessible, inclusive training programs that can support diverse groups of women. And another key policy that we want to discuss is eliminating age discriminatory hiring practices. Despite existing regulations, discriminatory hiring practices, they remain widespread in both public and private sector. And many job ads, they explicitly specify requirement of certain gender, age, marital status, or even physical attributes such as being attractive or good-looking candidates. That's horrifying, I know. So you can see some of the examples on the right. And these are like some of the stats that we got from Prospero Cyber Market dashboards, how prevalent it is across the online job ads. And these practices not only contradicted with the legal status and international labor standards, but they can also reinforce age-related social stigma, and this can further limit opportunities for women returning to the workforce, which often women wait until the children reach certain age before re-entering. And these, we just want to share with you a couple of countries. They have introduced targeted initiatives to support women returning to work, either by launching new programs or leveraging existing ones. You have South Korea with the sales centers, and then Singapore with her career program, Malaysia career comeback program. And one thing to note here, for UK's returner program, they not only open this for women, but also for men, acknowledging that both men and women have caregiving responsibilities. They may exit the workforce, they need support to re-enter. And just an example in terms of its pilot program, collaborating with public sector agencies, they are supporting health professionals returners and social workers returners. In the case of Indonesia, to effectively increase women's economic participation, policies must account for the unique workforce trajectories, including the exit and re-entry patterns. So to what extent training programs can cater to these women re-entering to the workforce? So flexible training options, they are essential, and also reflecting on our work with JPAL Southeast Asia to assist women with registration or onboarding, especially if this is a digital-based sort of training programs, because some women may find them challenging. And also to consider training sessions allowing women to bring their children and having a dedicated child space, for instance, if it is in-person training. And then shifting recruitment criteria to focus on skills, experience, and qualifications rather than age. Government can serve as a role model to remove age requirements from public sector job ads. And to think about return to work initiatives is not something as creating something new, but can be built upon existing government training, employment schemes, or for private sector to also consider this. And I think lastly, reaching Indonesia's 70% female labor force participation goal by 2045, that requires a comprehensive strategy. If Indonesia is really serious in achieving this target, to be honest, I was really surprised by this 70% target. For me, it seems really high. There's a link there if you want to know more. To give you context, Indonesia's female labor force participation now stood at around like 53%, and 70% is the case for Vietnam and Australia. As the developed country context with more generous childcare support, the female labor force participation is actually around 62%. So that means that achieving 70% will require more than just reskilling efforts. It also requires childcare support by the government. But then childcare alone is not a silver bullet. Any mother knows that caregiving extends beyond 9 to 5 schedule, kids get sick, emergencies arise, and how do working parents cope with that? And also caregiving also is not really limited to children, but also to our elderly parents. And this is why we also need workplace policies to change, recognizing that both men and women, they have caregiving responsibilities. They can think about providing caring leaves, flexible working arrangement. And at the same time, we also need to work towards more progressive gender norms, because achieving 70% female labor force participation should not come at the cost of women carrying double burden. Instead, it should really reflect a genuine progress where women have greater economic role, but is also supported by a more equal caring role by women and men. So I think with that, I'll hand it over to you, Bimbika.
Thank you both for such an excellent presentation, providing an overview, but also looking into the policy solutions. And your finding really highlighted that, while women are doing better in education, too many struggle to translate that into quality jobs. And this is a real development challenge. It's not just a personal issue, because it impacts women's economic opportunities, household incomes, and overall sort of economic growth. And it's also a waste of valuable skills and human capital investments that both women, their families, and the society at large has made. So thank you for this really great discussion, and also thinking through some of the policy solutions in terms of both uptake of programs and some challenges that still exist. On that note, I would now like to point to our panelists. I would like to first invite Monica. Monica, as a co-author of the World Bank's major report on pathways to middle-class jobs in Indonesia, you noted that most Indonesians are in low productivity jobs and aspirations for better paying, secure middle-class jobs are still largely unmet. So based on this work, how do you sort of reflect on some of the findings that and recommendations that Firman and Dika have presented? Over to you, Monica.
Yeah, good morning, good afternoon for colleagues in Australia. Thank you, ADB, for inviting me to this really important webinar. And thank you, Bimbika and Firman and Dika. There are a few points that I'd like to highlight. I think to complement with Firman and Dika's presentation, focusing more on the efforts to re-enter the labor market, right, after pregnancy and childbirth, I think my points would highlight more on the preventive measure. What can prevent a woman from dropping out? First, as we've seen from the presentation, urban women without and with post-secondary education have completely different labor force trajectories, as Firman already mentioned earlier. Urban women without post-secondary education have lower labor force participation, dropping out from the formal wage employment early to enter self-employment, especially after pregnancy and childbirth. So although, as mentioned during the presentation, girls have caught up in educational attainment in more recent years in Indonesia, only 18% of female workers in Indonesia have post-secondary education, right? So going forward, we want to make sure that girls don't drop out of school and continue to college, or at least upper secondary school, as a World Bank study shows that having even an upper secondary education already makes a large difference in women's labor force participation during their reproductive age. Meanwhile, we also want to attend to the existing more vulnerable, less educated female workers and think of programs that could bring these workers to either better quality jobs or provide them with necessary social safety nets. It's likely that the types of jobs that low-educated female workers have before pregnancy and childbirth are such that they don't come with any workers' benefits, even though they may be considered as formal jobs. For example, wage employment, but not all wage employment come with contracts and benefits. Say those in low-end services and public services, namely contract part-time teachers and nurses, all of which are considered formal jobs, but they don't come with any workers' benefits. So these female workers are deprived of access to maternity leave and guaranteed to go back to work after pregnancy and childbirth. So further studies should identify what types of jobs are associated with women dropping out of the labor market due to pregnancy and childbirth, and find ways to prevent scarring during their time out of the labor market. As Dika mentioned, current government programs are not specific to women with children re-entering the labor market and may not be accessible to all. So existing government programs should also be improved. Second, e-commerce has been providing the economic opportunities for women to return to the labor market after pregnancy and birth. Using Indonesia's 2019 labor force survey in its Indonesia's digital economy report, the World Bank shows that 60% of internet-using women who left their previous jobs due to pregnancy and childbirth now work in e-commerce, right? If women can succeed in e-commerce, that's not a bad thing. They can still make money. However, a digital merchant survey done in collaboration with Shopee in 2021 by the World Bank shows that female e-commerce merchants tend to self-select into selling traditionally feminine products such as care and beauty. And this could partly be explained by occupational segregation and the fact that women sell products that they themselves use and know about. The study also shows that being a homemaker and selling traditional feminine products are associated with lower sales. So homemakers are constrained with their time because they have to divide between their family, chores, and work, while traditionally feminine products tend to be low-value items. So more studies are needed to see who the positive deviants of the more successful female e-commerce merchants are. Going forward, tailor programs and business plan training specific for women with young children, promoting access to safe, reliable, affordable child and elderly care, as well as challenging norms on gender care responsibility are good ideas. And my last point is that, as Dika mentioned about the risk of AI, I think with fast developing technology, human skills are still irreplaceable. This include empathy, communication skills, right? A lot of occupation where female workers are concentrated in, such as personal services, health, education, are not so easily replaceable by AI. Who wants to have a robotic masu, right? Going forward, training not only technical skills but also human skills is key to keep female workers on the job, while opening better paths for them to higher productivity jobs with better job protection and job security. Thank you.
That was a really excellent response. Thank you, Monica. And also sort of enlarging our discussion, not just focusing on how to support women who've exited the labor market, but actually addressing the root cause, which is preventing as well. And thanks for the well-rounded sort of recommendations based on your work. And you've also charted a very interesting, call for additional research. So I hope that, our audience will also pick this up. And I would like to remind our audience that please do post your Q&A in the Q&A box. And for questions that you particularly like, please put like and thumbs up so that we can refer them back to our panelists. So next, I would like to invite Samir. So Samir, you've done a lot of research on labor market trends. So across the region, how does Indonesia compare to other countries in terms of women leaving the workforce after marriage and childbirth? And then could you also share some examples of, in your work, how is ADB supporting initiatives to help women sort of re-enter the workforce, but then going back to, Monica's point, preventing women's exit in the first place? So over to you, Samir.
Thank you, Bimbika. I think it's hard to follow up after Monica, but I'll do my best. So first I want to start by talking about why do we even care about this, right? So I'm based on my work before in Southeast Asia, in Indonesia and Philippines, and also in the last 2-3 years in India, Nepal, Bangladesh, particularly in India. The why do we care? So I think when we look at East Asian economic miracle, and there's a very nice paper by Danny Roderick, and he looks at the success stories from East Asia, and he finds that women's labor force participation was one of the critical drivers of their economic experience. And one indicator that he points out in his paper is about employment of women in manufacturing sector. So 42%, I think that's the average he finds among those countries that were successful. 42% of all employment in manufacturing was women. And when I look at this, so this is the why, right? So why do we care? Because of course, to achieve that, we need to have more women in the labor force to begin with, and employed as well. So when I look at India, in case of India, what we found is that about 20% of all employment in manufacturing is women. So we're a long way away from 42. I don't have the number for Indonesia off the top of my head, but I think it's perhaps closer to 42 than it is to 20. So that's the why question. When I look at the presentation is very good, and thank you to Dika and Firman. It reminds me of a work we did. ADB had a study on impact of COVID-19 on labor markets in Southeast Asia. We looked at Indonesia as well among the countries in the sample. And one of the things we found in that study was that during COVID, the first set of job losses we saw in 2020 was a lot of women left workforce immediately, and we saw a huge sort of out of the labor market for women, and largely due to caregiving responsibilities sort of falls on women's shoulders. So hence a lot of them left the labor force. But then what we also found, interestingly enough, was that towards the end of 2020, early 2021, a lot of them went back to the labor market. And I think this goes back to the findings you showed between rural versus urban, and also between ones with higher skill, better educated, and lower skill, less educated. So we saw these differences across skills spectrum as well. And I think Monica's point on wage employment, of course, is a good type of employment in our part of the world. But wage employment comes with some of these benefits about paid leave, sick leave, and what have you. But a lot of the women we found were employed in self-employed types setup, where of course they don't have those types of benefits. So when they leave the job market, and then they come back whenever they're able to. So we have found that, and I think it's good to see that you have sort of found a similar type of finding in your work. When it comes to labor market, the labor force participation, I think there are some similarities with India as well. But of course, in case of India, the LFPR is much lower, but both overall for women and also for rural and urban as well. When I look at the difference between rural and urban in India, we find that 36.6% is the participation rate for women in rural areas. In case of urban areas, only 23.8%. So much lower. And here, Bimbika already alluded to this, but ADB has several programs in India as part of our lending programs, also non-lending activities as well. I am in the public sector management and governance sector office of ADB. So the programs that I've been engaged in, so one on economic corridor development, logistics sector development, where we have focused on how do we improve labor force participation, how do we bring in more women into manufacturing sector, because some of these reforms around economic corridor development, logistics sector development is about raising the economic competitiveness of India, export competitiveness, manufacturing sector competitiveness. So a large part of it, as you know, is getting women into these sectors is very important. Logistics, actually, very small fraction of the labor force is women, employed labor force. But you look at economic corridor, there it's the picture is a bit better. And India has many ongoing efforts as well. But of course, I think this is an ongoing program. There are many ongoing programs by the government. One of the objectives of the Indian government, like Indonesian government, where 70% labor force participation. Of course, it's very ambitious, and I hope Indonesia achieves that. In case of India, I think in the last several years, we have seen an increase of labor force participation for women. Still, it's considerably lower. I think it depends on which number you look at. ILO estimates are a bit lower than the government estimates. It's anywhere between 33 to 40% is labor force participation rate. So I think it might be somewhere in between these two numbers. And one of the reasons that ILO has pointed out is that the reason why labor force participation for women is lower in India is because of caregiving responsibilities and also unpaid domestic work as well. The caregiving comes more higher on the list. So some of the programs that we have been supporting, for example, there's an investment project in a small state of Tripura in India where ADB is helping renovate some of the industrial parks, upgrade some of the industrial parks. And their one activity is about providing daycare centers, skilling initiatives for women, precisely because to sort of knowing that the caregiving responsibilities sort of tend to get women out of the labor force. And one thing, Bimbika, if I may, before giving the mic over to you, in terms of policy recommendations that Dika and that Firman pointed out, it's good to hear that Kartu Prakarja has been very important in terms of providing reskilling initiatives and efforts. But correct if I'm mistaken, but I think there's attached to it, right? When there's a social assistance attached to it, the take-up rate tends to be much higher. But when there's no social assistance, of course, the take-up rate is much lower than you can imagine. So the problem we face in this part of the world is that if there's no social assistance, well, no matter how well designed the training initiatives are, hard for people to sign up. And the digital, glad to hear the digital skilling initiatives, of course, is the way to go. But of course, it also tends to worsen the divide between low skilled and better skilled. I think this is an ongoing effort for all of us. But one last point I want to make before giving it to Bimbika is this, the role of technology and AI, right? So as Joe knows, Joe Ziviglich, our Deputy Chief Economist at ADB, that we did a nice work back a few years ago for Asian Development Outlook, on how technology affects jobs. And what we found is that new types of work tends to be created, new types of employment, new types of occupations are also created with technology. So, of course, some jobs will disappear, but many will appear. So I'm much more optimistic when it comes to technology's impact, but we'll have to see how this plays out. Over to you, Bimbika. Thank you.
Thank you so much again, Samir, for such a well-rounded response and also for giving us a comparative overview of how Indonesia compares with India. The numbers couldn't have been more different. And then it seems like, there's some issues around the numbers as well. But then at the same time, the issues around care and, skills are comparable across. So it feels like this kind of regional and comparative perspective really sort of adds value to all the countries in the region, especially those that are quite big, like India and Indonesia. On artificial intelligence, I would like to say that it would be really great if some of the unpaid care work could also be addressed through artificial intelligence. But that's a topic for another discussion. So over to my colleague, Harumi. So Harumi, with your extensive experience in private sector-led gender solutions, what is the private sector's perspective on this issue, private sector employers' perspective on this issue? And can you also highlight some successful workforce re-entry or even prevention initiatives that have really benefited women and also the businesses? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bimbika. So my name is Harumi Toyama. I'm one of the gender specialists at ADB. My roles include supporting private sector companies in promoting gender equality and increasing women's workforce participation at all levels. It's my pleasure to be part of the panel today discussing the challenges and opportunities regarding women's return to work. So for those who are unfamiliar, ADB's private sector investment is one of the priorities of the bank. And in terms of our support for the promotion of gender equality for private sector firms, we do support them to review and enhance their corporate policy and practice. That includes looking at HR equal opportunity policy related to hiring, women's training, parental leave, policy on anti-sexual harassment, policy on supply diversity to increase opportunities for women-owned businesses across the supply chain, and so on. So together with the company that we support, what we do is to develop a gender action plan with a variety of activities and then provide also support to deliver the plan as well. The study findings presented today are really important evidence, I think, that we need to think strategically about how women can be supported to return to work after childbirth through skills training. And so discussion here today and from my side is to add another dimension to it, which is the private sector employers' perspectives. And employers do have an important role to play here. Today, as we already touched on earlier, many companies face challenges of attracting and retaining their workforce with the right skill sets. So if women are unable to come back to the labor market, that is lost talent. And of course, it's having to deal with staff turnover, its cost to the company. And they are also increasingly looking at diverse talents. Many studies suggest that companies with more diverse workforce and a higher percentage of women, particularly in leadership, outperform their peers with less diverse and inclusive workforce. So it is not surprising that an increased number of companies that we work with at ADB, they are increasingly also interested in integrating gender in their policy and many initiatives across their firm. And I think it's becoming more relevant in a fast-changing industry, as mentioned already by Dika and Monica. For example, technological innovations, things are increasingly more automated, or specialized industry knowledge, such as certain regulations and compliance needs to be updated all the time. Now, I'd like to share a couple of examples of company practices that are relevant to today's discussion. Some ADB clients' gender initiatives include establishing a daycare center for garment workers, safe gender-segregated facilities, introducing flexible working, adopting parental and promoting parental leave, and so on. one of the companies in India which had an issue of retention of women workers. And they introduced a variety of measures, and they increased the retention rate dramatically from less than 20% to over 70%. So this is through, as I said, a number of measures, including introducing remote working, establishing gender-sensitive facilities and accommodation, communications campaign to highlight the company support to women, and so on. So it's a very rounded sort of approach to tackling retention. I'd like to mention one example of a company that I was speaking to just last week, actually, about skills training conducted by them. So this is a manufacturing company with operations in several countries in Asia. They have organized a training program specifically targeted at women to learn about health and safety standards and practices of another factory in a different country. And they are also thinking about sending another cohort of women to learn about the automation of factory facilities in another country. So my observation here is that this demonstrates the company's commitment to training women with a view to retaining talent with relevant skills and knowledge. And this, of course, helps address the issue of depreciation of knowledge among women. So when they decide to have a break to have children, or when they are just back from their maternity leave, they are equipped with the relevant and up-to-date knowledge. Also, women naturally feel empowered with their skills and knowledge upgraded, and they feel really valued as part of the company's workforce as well. And it's important for the company to ensure that this type of equality and diversity measures are really part of corporate culture. And this means, women, not only just women, but men are also on board with this, and that they see the benefits of inclusive workforce and a conducive work environment. So, obviously, a safe working environment is safe for both women and men, and also increased well-being for all as well. So I stop here, and back to you, Bimbika.
Thank you so much. And thank you for, also sort of elaborating on Samir's point about why do we care about this question and what's in it for employers. And great to see there's so many great initiatives underway. We have quite a few questions, and if I may, I will cluster two questions. One is quite provocative, and the other one is more sort of informative, I suppose. So the question is, projects that are focusing on training, why do they actually need to focus on women? Can't they just be general? Encouraging also women to join the training. And then, the focus should be on sort of working conditions and not the training itself. So how much should we emphasize training? That's one part of the question. The other part of the question is, how do we actually ensure that after the training, women actually enter the workforce? So, let me invite panelists to provide like short thoughts on this question, and then perhaps we can wrap up afterwards. There's a lot of comparative questions as well, so we really hope to engage in this discussion. We'll be sure to keep a track of the questions and also get back to you. So over to the panelists. Let me invite Monica first.
Okay, these are quite difficult questions. So the first question, training, why we need to focus on women. I think there are really women-specific issues that needs to be addressed in kind of like what kind of work, what type of jobs, and for example, how do women divide their household chores with work, right? I mean, I guess my answers is that there are many women-specific issues that will relate to the kinds of future jobs that they may and can take after training, right? So that's perhaps why we want to have trainings that are more specific to women, especially women with children. And on the second question, after training, how do we make sure that they actually enter the labor force? I think that's more on the personal choice and personal needs. Of course, women who perhaps are more educated, who may have time, more time or more financial backup and security to wait to get like better jobs, they may wait until they get like better jobs. But again, I think there's no guarantee that those who take trainings will enter the labor force, except that it's have to be based on their own personal choice and decision and needs.
Thank you, Monica. So over to our next. Maybe I will invite Dika to respond to this other question about AI. You know, there seem to be, even among this group, there seem to be sort of divided opinion, let's say, on the role of AI. So some, of us are concerned that it will lead to, and it is leading to, a loss of jobs, and other are more sort of optimistic that, especially if personal traits such as compassion and empathy is not easily replaceable, and that if we focus on those, that there would be other opportunities that would emerge. So let's invite, Dika and then Samir to respond to that question. Please keep your responses brief because we have to finish very soon. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I'll just make a very quick comment. AI presents both threats and opportunities. It may really replace repetitive work that probably is concentrated in manufacturing sector. In my other research focusing on textile and pretty much more labor-intensive skills, they tend to hire more women. But then at the same time, it presents opportunities where women who can work with AI, they can be more productive, and then they can negotiate, for instance, higher returns for the skills. They are still pretty much still very rare that people have this.
Thank you, Bimbika. On the tech, I think I've already answered that question. The question on training versus workplace standards, I think that's a very, very important question. And Monica did a good job at answering this. Just to add to this, based on our experience working with countries with our ADB loans in India, what I can share is that training can be supported by public sector. Right? There's a space for public policy. But workplace standards is much more private. So the companies also care about that. Right? So the private sector, the enterprises have to invest in better workplace standards like daycare centers, dedicated transport service. In India, that's very important because men and women better to have a separate transport service to get to work even. So we have invested in some of these activities. And then in case of training, much more driven by public sector investments. And here, I think it's needed, especially as Monica also pointed out, after a gap. There's an employment gap and after a childbirth, it's critical. We need that. So I would say we need both. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Bimbika.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you so much. And then, I'm going to give the last word to Firman and then to Harumi to share like one message that they would like to leave the audience with. And then we will wrap up. So over to you, Firman first, and then to Harumi.
Okay, I think what at least from our study, I think it's really important to recognize the heterogeneity and the different patterns or the challenges faced by women trying to participate in the labor market, even among the urban, as we see in our study among the urban women, the challenges can be quite very different between those who are with lower education and higher education. And the policy have to address those differences as well.
Over to you, Harumi. One message.
Okay, thank you. So I think companies should embrace gender policy and develop innovative initiatives as part of their corporate strategy because of multiple benefits. And through innovative solutions to retain women, companies can remain competitive with a diverse workforce with the right skills and knowledge. And lastly, there needs to be public and private sector dialogue and collaboration with efficient and effective outcomes. Private sector has the real understanding of the labor force demand and can actually contribute to policy making in terms of what may be needed for regulatory barriers to be addressed and so on. So likewise, also policymakers should leverage the private sector in this area as well to understand the needs and reflect them in the policy and initiatives as well.
Thank you so much, both of you, for raising this issue of heterogeneity and for this engagement with both the public and private sector. Thank you again to the speakers and panelists for your excellent presentation and remarks. I certainly enjoyed and learned a lot, and I hope that all of our audience have. I see a lot of questions, so I hope that we will continue this engagement moving forward. Before we end, I'd like to invite you to join our next Asian Impact webinar, which is the Harnessing the Benefits of Regional Cooperation and Integration, which is on March 27th from 2 to 3 Manila time. Here is a poster for the event. I hope that you will join and continue participating and adding to the richness of this webinar series. Thank you again. And this is Bimbika Sijapati Basnett from Asian Development Bank signing off. Thank you.